Welcome to Fine Line Station, where I read out letters and emails sent by you, the listeners. They are real-life stories about the uncanny, the creepy, and the unknown. I am your host, Charlie Fox, and I hope you're ready to tune in. As it starts getting a little cooler, today we welcome back Brandon Dove again. He mentioned in this email that he has been feeling nostalgic and a little self-reflective lately, hence the several stories he's shared recently. That's no worries at all, Brandon. I am always happy to share your family stories with your permission. I always love reading about them, and I know my listeners love hearing them as well. Today we learn about Brandon's father and his obsession with time. Oh, and quickly, Rowan is off sick today, so hopefully all of this is running smoothly. He is the one who usually handles all the tech stuff, and I have more of a passing knowledge. I'm also pretty sure we've had an influx of listeners recently, if I'm reading the numbers right. I don't know where you all came from, but thank you. Rowan must have been too busy to let me know, so I'm glad I chanced across it and can let you know how much I appreciate it. Thank you for tuning into these mysteries with me. But anyway, let's take a wander through Brandon's story. My dad was obsessed with counting time. Our home was filled with a variety of different clocks. Even now, 5 years later, we still left a good portion of them up. There were the classic analog ones I always associated with school, staring at them longingly to speed up in a class I wanted to end. We had a few digital ones scattered around, the red or green lit numbers almost acting as night lights for me when I wandered around in the dark. We had two huge grandfather clocks. One was in the main living area with a deep sounding bell, and the other was in the kitchen. It sounds odd. Originally Dad wanted it in the master bedroom, but that was where Mum drew the line of having the noisy thing directly in front of them. That clock was always my favourite. It was a lighter shade of wood, and the ringing tone was still loud, but it had a sweet melody attached to it. We had a few cuckoo clocks as well, hung on various sections of free wall. Dad would always try and perfectly get them to line up time-wise, but they were always just out enough that when the chirps rang out, they were slightly off from each other. You'd think as a kid I would have hated all that constant noise, but I actually got pretty used to it. In some ways, I came to rely on it. The hourly chimes genuinely helped me stay on track with my everyday life, and I found their chimes and chirps comforting when sleeping. Dad was good to keep the noisy clocks, aside from the one grandfather clock in the kitchen, confined to the living room, so it was more of a soft, distant sound than anything too disturbing. I remember sleeping over at a friend's place for the first time and being put off when there wasn't those familiar sounds. My dad was always a numbers man. He loved math in school and followed that passion into his working life. He did some kind of statistic work for the government, I think. Honestly, I tended to zone out when he talked about his work. I'm glad he enjoyed it, but I for sure was not nearly as mathematically inclined as he. While I inherited his green eyes and dark hair, I certainly didn't inherit his love of numbers. Looking back, I wish I had learnt more about what he did and how he used those numbers he loved so much. I shared that story with you about my Aunt Lola and her collections of all sorts of things. You may think Dad's collection to be similar, and while we did end up with a small hoard of clocks, my dad was otherwise a sparse person. Even the clocks physically themselves he didn't particularly care for. It was the ability to tell the time he was obsessed with. To help get a better understanding of my dad, he was one of those people who would look up exactly how long it took to get somewhere so we could leave at the appropriate time. He wasn't like a hyper-organised person by any means. We were still sometimes late to events. Sometimes Mum or I would simply take too long getting ready, but that didn't faze him much. Instead, he would simply recalculate the leaving and arrival times. He loved knowing exactly how long it would take to get somewhere, and would even mostly understand how long average things would take. Like, generally, how fast Mum walked so he could add that to his calculations, or different traffic conditions at different times on his usual routes. I remember I had a friend over once and Dad was driving us to a basketball game. My friend was impressed by how Dad was able to almost perfectly get us there at the time we wanted. You may think judging times isn't really that impressive. I mean, we have Google Maps now, and that takes into consideration traffic and road conditions that may affect your drive or walk. But when I say my dad would measure how long something took, he would do so down to the second. It would take 15 seconds to walk from the front door to the car, 42 seconds to get situated, unless Mum was there, which added an extra 1 minute and 3 seconds. On an average Tuesday afternoon, it would take between 8 minutes and 38 seconds and 10 minutes and 14 seconds to park at the supermarket. Assuming you were skipping school pickup and going before the rush hour home. It would take 45 seconds to grab the shopping trolley if they were directly in front of the store, an extra 4 seconds if they were almost out, and an extra 56 seconds if the trolleys were stored at the other section. Yeah, that's what I mean by he was obsessed with counting and tracking time. He always had a thing for numbers, so he was able to remember a lot of these if he went through the similar motion a few times. Give him a TV show he watched last year though, and he wouldn't remember much about it. It took me a while to make the connection as to why my dad was like this. He probably just had the right personality for it at first, loving numbers a bit too much and finding sense in them where he couldn't find it in the rest of the world. The other thing my dad loved besides numbers was swimming. It may seem a bit random, but Dad was encouraged to play some kind of sport in his youth by his parents. I think he tried a few team sports, but they never meshed well with his introverted self, so instead he tried swimming. He first took lessons to learn how to correctly do everything, and then he moved on to doing laps after school. He wasn't competing against anyone, well, except for himself. He didn't have to really interact with others, but still stayed fit and healthy. While he didn't race against others, he did race against himself. He would record how long it took him to do his laps in different strokes, and he especially enjoyed the challenge of holding his breath for as long as he could. I get that. As a teenager, my friends and I would often go to local swim centres and race against each other and always finish off with seeing who could hold their breaths the longest. I was pretty bad at this, and most of my friends would beat me. I even asked Dad for tips once, but I would panic too much to ever actually use them. Dad told me he was always trying to hold his breath for as long as he could. Apparently there are specifically trained free divers who could go up to 11 minutes. And while Dad had never taken any courses, he followed a lot of their techniques. When Dad was 17, he made his father accompany him one afternoon to show off his skills. His record at this point was at 4 minutes and 33 seconds. Maybe Dad was a bit nervous, or maybe he didn't do the deep calming breaths you're meant to start with before going under. Either way, he only reached 4 minutes and 15 seconds. His dad was still impressed, of course, but Dad was disappointed he couldn't show off his best. That day driving home, they got into a car accident. They slowed down to let another car back out of a driveway, and because of that, a reckless driver didn't see them and smashed into the driver's side. My dad survived, but his dad didn't. My dad has told me the story because naturally as a kid I asked about the grandfather I'd never met. My dad would always finish off the story the same. If he had held his breath for another 18 seconds and did what he knew he could, they would have missed the car reversing and would have never been hit. Yeah, looking back now, you can see how that completely fueled his obsession with keeping track of time. There is something called chronophobia, where you fear the passage of time. I wasn't aware of the term, but one of my aunts jokingly said it about Dad at a family gathering. My mum got defensive, but Dad laughed and said he didn't fear the passage of time, he just wanted to always be aware of it. Writing this now, I don't necessarily know if that's any better, truthfully. I never talked about it in depth with my dad, but I guess the continuous tracking gave him a sense of control. Something terribly unexpected happened in his life, and his way of coping was to obsessively track time. I feel like he definitely got worse as the years went on, or maybe I just became more aware of it the older I got. He would know exactly how long it would take to get from school to soccer practice, and how that changed depending on which day of the week it was. He knew the route perfectly to my best friend's house, and how the time would vary depending if it was a weekday or weekend, afternoon or evening. As I met more and more people in my life, and my friends' parents and family, I realised that what my dad did wasn't completely normal. Oh, you've heard me say that about a lot of my family, and it will continue to be true for most stories I share. Anyway, I became increasingly annoyed with Dad when he would spout off his numbers and I would roll my eyes at him, plugging my ears with headphones. I sigh at the younger me from back then, but I was a teenager who didn't want to deal with my dad's quirky habits. It got worse when I was about 19. I drove myself everywhere by this point and was enjoying my time off from study before I decided what to do with my future, so I spent more time away from home than at home. One evening I joined them for dinner after not spending much time with them the past few weeks. It was nice. I really do like my parents. I just sometimes felt a bit overwhelmed by them and needed time away. We got talking and my dad shared a documentary they had both watched that was about the dilemma of determinism, a book by William James. I had to re-look it up because I'd forgotten some of the details, but it's basically looking into free will and how to assign responsibility for actions if they are entirely caused by past events. Is it inevitable for something to happen because all of the things in the past have led to this moment? In that case, does free will even exist if our actions and reactions are predetermined by our biology and environment? I must admit, I personally don't care much if free will exists or not, and I believe you will generally end up where you're meant to. But it was a really interesting conversation I had with my parents that evening. Dad seemed especially excited about these ideas, especially that, in theory, so much of our lives was outside of our control. Again, looking back now, it's obvious he had finally found a way to forgive himself for what happened back when he was younger. He loved his father and wanted his praise for his swimming skill. He wanted his appreciation but was nervous from the pressure to show off his skills. Because of this, he didn't do his warm-ups well enough or forgot to practice the meditation type skills you need to hold your breath for a long time. There was no other choice but to finish holding his breath early, not hit his record and pause to let the car reverse out. It wasn't his fault. It was inevitable. Or at least that's what I can assume he was thinking after discussing it with Mum a few times. After this revelation, he picked up an extra quirk. He still obsessively counted time and made sure he was aware of its passing, but now he also accounted any delays where he had to recalculate due to determinisms. Traffic was extra heavy getting to the doctors one day. It's because it's flu season and people were getting sick. They were getting sick because they didn't have time to book a flu vaccine. They didn't have time because they were in a busy season of work, and so on and so on. It honestly reminds me of the whole everything happens for a reason sentiment that quite a few people follow, but to my dad, who found solace in numbers where things built up from one another or could be traced back to a logical starting point, this perspective seemed to help him better understand and accept the world for what it was. I am glad he managed to find some respite, but it was still very difficult when he passed away when I was 21. When I turned 20 and moved out, I would try and catch up with my parents once a week for dinner, then once a fortnight, then once a month. I still loved them and they still loved me, but I was growing up. Dad had started working part-time so him and my mum could travel more and they seemed to enjoy their various road trips. Dad still continued on with his quirks, but seeing them infrequently caused me to be more fond than annoyed now. I got the call when I was out with friends celebrating a mate's birthday. They'd gotten into a car accident driving home from one of their weekends away. I rushed to the hospital. Mum luckily only had a broken wrist and a few cuts from the impact, but Dad was much worse off. He had heavy internal bleeding in his lungs and would need surgery. I rushed over there and he was barely conscious before he was carted away. He breathlessly told me that my mum and him had finally visited that caravan park by the beach they'd been wanting to go back to since I was born. He said he had finally beat his record for holding his breath. 4 minutes and 42 seconds. That was the last thing my dad said to me. He unfortunately passed during surgery. It was further explained to me by the doctors that they had been driving home from the park and after turning off the freeway to their home suburb, they had swerved to avoid a speeding car and ran into a tree. I think I think I finally understood my dad at that point. If he had simply not beaten his record, left those few precious seconds earlier, they would have safely gotten off the freeway and headed home. But he was always trying to compete against himself, so I guess it was inevitable that he finally won. It's been 5 years, and while it's still hard at times, I do find myself smiling more than crying now when I think of Dad's silly habits. As I said, we still have most of his clocks up around the house, and I like to spend at least half my time there, if I can, with my mum. Both to see my mum, but also to hear the clocks go off every hour. It's a morbid thought, but there is something poetic about the way my dad died. It was a full circle moment my dad would have probably appreciated. His own dad had died in a crash due to unexpected time variations, so it made sense that he would pass that way too. Perhaps it's strange, but it does give me some comfort. And that brings us to the end of today's story. Oh, my Brandon, I've apologized to you before for your loss, but losing a dad is a distinct kind of pain. You mentioned about your family's quirks and how they all seem normal to you growing up. I feel like so many of us have that in some way with our families too, and it's a great reminder to reminisce on them. Your comments about free will are also interesting. So many of the stories shared with me tend to involve coincidence. Perhaps they are often attached to fascinating tales of the odd and uncanny, so we can't help but point them out when recounting them. I wonder if they do mean something more. If they are caused by something more. It seems too easy to go off without Rowan glaring at me behind the window. Sorry, I'll leave you all be. This has been another broadcast by Fine Line Station. I'm Charlie Fox, and I'll speak to you next time.